everybody, I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI radio network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. We know him as the patriarch of the Clampett family, and also as the detective Barnaby Jones. But did you know he almost died during the filming of The Wizard of Oz? That's why he wasn't eventually in the cast. The great Buddy Ebsen, who if he had had his way would not have gone into entertainment at all.
I wanted to be a doctor, actually, for idealistic purposes. I was inspired to do something, strike a blow against an illness that struck down my youngest sister. Anyway, I went to medical school, with pre-med for 2 years, University of Florida a year, and then Rollins College a year. Then the Florida boom collapsed, and we sort of ran out of money, and I knew that I wasn't smart enough to work my way through medical school, so I did the next best thing. I became a dancer because my father had taught me dancing.
What happened then after you finally began to be known? How did you make the move then to the West Coast, your first break, as they would say in Hollywood?
Well, I went to New York in 1928. And with $26.65 in my sock and a letter of introduction to a friend of my ex-college roommate's cousin.
Wow.
Who was a chorus boy at a show that was closing. Well, anyway, then I brought my sister to New York. I got various jobs in New York.
Let me move forward to something that I know is that you write about at length in your book. You base the title of the book on it, but yet still again, a lot of young people don't know that you might have been the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. I guess it's a wonderful thing to look back on, but at the time, a terribly painful thing that happened. Can you tell us about that experience and what your feelings are looking back?
Sure. The Wizard of Oz, incidentally, the title is because there are a lot of wizards in Hollywood, and some are very good wizards, and some are,
some are shysters, as they say,
true.
yes.
True. Anyway, I was under contract to MGM, and this big picture came along, and first they told me I was going to be the Scarecrow, and of course I was delighted. And then Ray Bolger came on the lot, and the minute I saw him, I thought, uh-oh, there goes my part, because he'd been doing a Scarecrow dance in vaudeville for years. But they shifted me to the Tin Woodman. So I was satisfied with that. Now the problem occurred when they didn't know exactly how to make me up to get the metallic effect. What they did was to cover my face with what they call clown white, and then powder on aluminum dust. And of course, you're going to breathe some of this stuff. And after they, utilized the powder puff a dozen times in a day, I had a lung full of aluminum dust. After 10 days of that, I went to the hospital with emphysema.
Wow. Well, finally, after 10 days, then, you suffered some, not only just emphysema, but cramps, pretty severe manifestations from that, didn't you?
Yes, it was scary, because I knew if the cramps went to my chest, I wouldn't be able to breathe. And so, anyway, they said, well, we can't afford to lose another singing, dancing comedian. What can we do? So the bright young man in the makeup department said, why don't we make it in the form of a paste? So they put it onto him in the form of a
But by that time, they had to proceed with the movie, so they moved Jack Haley into
That's right. So Jack Haley got the benefit of my being his guinea pig.
Is it true that there are still, you can see you in the movie if you know where to look?
Well, we know for sure that in one of the sequences, we're off to see the wizard, they detect my voice in there. And I'm sure in some of the long shots when you couldn't tell who was in the suit, I'm sure I'm in there.
What point in your career did you feel that people were beginning to look at you as not just a song and dance man, but a person who was a legitimately fine actor? Was there one role where that happened? Was there, for example, was there a period, as so many actors go through, where there is that change of identity, where they're just not calling for you?
I think Breakfast at Tiffany's, which happened much later, was that point that you're speaking of. when I played horse doctor from Texas, and I think that gave me the stature that you're talking about.
I, of course, have to ask you about the Beverly Hillbillies. How did that role come along? And I see you in those episodes, and you seem to be so much above the character you're playing. It's as if you are doing the George Burns thing where you're looking out at the audience and saying, do I really want to do this? Was it as much fun on the set as those shows appear? It just seemed as if you were spoofing a spoof on a spoof. And they hold up so well.
You know what we call it in the cast?
What?
A license to steal. We worked for 3 days a week and had 4 days a weekend.
That's unheard of in a TV series, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was a half-hour show, and it took 3 days to make it. That was a wonderful experience, and you want to know how it happened that I was in it. Paul Henning, whom I didn't know, was analyzing the successes of various television shows and decided they were all built around a tall man. So he said, who's tall? So they decided Buddy Ebsen was tall. So they talked to me first, and he had a script written, and he had an idea of how he wanted it cast and the story. He called me in, and my agent and I and his executive producer were in the room, and he started to relate the elements of the series, and I heard it. Granny was going to be very funny, Ellie Mae was going to be very funny, Jethro was going to be very funny, Mr. Drysdale was going to be very funny. I kept wondering where Jed was going to be very funny. And I began to red lights started going on, and then he said, "Well, you want to do it?" And I said, "Well, I tell you, Paul, if I can always have control of the money, then I will do the
what a wise move.
Well, then I couldn't get lost.
Now, we had a little debate here at the office today, and maybe this is common, as to the relationships. Granny was your
mother-in-law.
Former dead, deceased wife's mother.
That's correct.
And then the two, Jethro and Ellie, were your
cousin Pearl fitted in there somewhere.
Now, was that B. Benaderet?
B. Benaderet. That was Jethro's mother, but Ellie was my daughter.
Okay. Ellie was your daughter, but Max Baer Jr. was the son. It gets complicated here.
Son of B. Benaderet.
Okay, but he came out with you.
He came out with us, sure. Well, we made him 9 years.
Okay.
We made 267 of them, I think.
And then was that about the time CBS decided it was too rural? Generally, was that what happened?
You want to hear the story that I heard?
Tell me from your standpoint.
The Hillbillies, a big success. Then Paul parlayed two more, Green Acres and Petticoat Junction. Mm-hmm. So then along came a couple of other country things. Now there's a restaurant in New York, the Colony Restaurant. And Mrs. William Paley used to have lunch there. And she came in one day and she heard a catty remark from one of her, quote, friends, unquote. She says, "Oh, here comes the wife of the owner of the Hillbilly Network."
Ooh.
Shortly after that, there was a decimation of many of the Hillbilly shows from CBS. That may or may not be true. I don't know, but that's the story I heard.
Before we leave the Beverly Hillbillies, tell me about Irene Ryan. She was much younger in real life than the character she was portraying, right?
Yeah, but I never had the guts to ask her what her age
was. How old she was?
But she was, I'll tell you about Irene. She was a darling lady, and in my book, a professional, and I loved her. She was just a wonderful pro and just great to work with.
I started to call you Barnaby.
Why not? Good evening, ma'am. My name is Barnaby Jones. I understand your husband went out to buy the evening paper one night 10 years ago and never came back. You want me to find him because his supper's getting cold. Part of my act.
And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI radio network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.